So, did I want to expect that I'll explain how to write a game engine? If yes, then don't worry, I'll explain some great stuff, but not how to write a game engine today. So, getting closer, HTML5 gaming in 2011. As Malte already mentioned, I've done a talk last year, and this year will be a bit more, more closer to the goal. First of all, me. I'm CTO of Zynga Germany. Zynga Germany was Dextrose before and has become Zynga Germany. I'm the creator of the Aves engine prototypes that I've released last year. Went through the Twitter sphere a lot. And jQueUI. And I also love shiny things, so I love getting shit done. Zynga Germany is the first European development studio that Zynga has created. And this sounds a bit cheesy, but we are really creating the tech of the future. That's what we're doing. We're doing R&D development over here. Just a quick words about Zynga. Who's Zynga? Zynga is the world's leading social game developer. Most people connected to Farmville, Cityville. And I have to tell you that I wasn't a social gamer before I joined Zynga. I was a traditional console gamer, so I didn't really understand social games. And it struck me that social games can actually reach huge numbers of people and a very, very different target audience, much broader target audience. So we now have more than 60 million daily active players who play our games and more than 230 million monthly active players that we can reach through those games. That's what makes it really exciting. We also started to be really global. So now our games are played in over 166 countries in 16 different languages. And what made it really, really exciting to me is, if you look at console games, they're fun and they're played a lot. But if you look at social games, you see a certain pattern, right? Social games, if you compare it to TV, our games like Cityville and Farmville are actually, consume more entertainment time of people's lives than popular TV shows like Dancing with the Stars, American Idol, stuff like that. So it's a great way to reach a really broad audience. Well, let's get started. Flashback. So first of all, in April 2010, that was the first time where we showed the Aves engine prototype 1. So it was a medieval world where guys were walking around, stuff like that. And that was on a Mac where we displayed it. Then in June 2010, we did a new prototype that was based in a modern world, and it was all about community. It was all about running it cross-platform. So we had a video that showed it running on iPad, and that was the exciting new scoop there. Then in February 2011, I realized that browser games, the term browser game is actually diluted, and was founding a new term called open web games, because that's what we wanted to build. We wanted to build games that are cross-platform, plug-in free, and run across any device. And I still have the feeling that we were running faster than what technology could give us, so we were running away from technology at that time. And now it's interesting how this all develops now. So looking back, from 1.5 years ago, how did browser tech evolve? And this is, there's a lot more stuff that's happening, but this is what really relevant to us. So WebGL, let's talk about that first. WebGL is exciting, and it's really exciting to us because it allows us to, build stuff in 3D or, accelerate 2D stuff in 3D. However, if you look at the adoption pattern of WebGL, WebGL is now almost 2 years old. Yeah, it's actually that old, so the spec is really, has matured. But the first implementations we saw, 1.5 years ago. So, and still, the only thing we're seeing right now are demos. And not only are some of them are really cool, but they still look like the demo scene from the 90s. And that can be really retro and sexy. But if you want to create a new console, console game or something that looks like a console game, something that's really exciting and attracts people, I haven't seen a single use case for WebGL yet that really, makes a huge experience. That's bad, and I hope we can see some soon. Canvas. What about Canvas? Well, Canvas is adopted broader than WebGL, but we still have the issue that, for now, the main use case of Canvas remains being graphs and charts, and that's very unfortunate. So, Canvas has the advantage that it allows you to do everything, and the downside that it allows you to do everything. And most people don't realize in the game world is that as soon as you, have to manage a scene graph for drawing yourself and not leave it to the browser, you're moving all this bottleneck that was on the browser before in native C code and move it to JavaScript. So now everything's executed in JavaScript, and you have this huge JS heap that people, sometimes can't deal with, and that's a problem. So still not really deployed widely. If you look at, the top 100 pages that people use, it's really hard to see where Canvas is used. Now, this was from a couple slides that I've published last year. Unfortunately, it's still true. Audio is still broken. There's still the codec battle. iPhone problems, one sound at a time. Weird security model, so you can only activate sound when you click on something. There's still memory issues, and you can't cache sound. So that's non-obvious, but if you create a cache manifest on your mobile device, there's no way to cache that sound in there. That's a big issue. Device APIs are still missing. So stuff like camera, file system access on mobile devices, everything that we want to play with. And then there's some non-obvious stuff, like we have access to the gyroscope, for instance, nowadays, and orientation change. However, gyroscope information right now is completely useless because you can't prevent orientation from changing. So as soon as you have a ball on an iPhone, you want to rotate your phone to move the ball, right? The phone just changes its orientation arbitrarily, and that's problematic. So those things are not well thought out yet. Now this is a big one for me, right? Mobile debugging on mobile devices. It's not there, it's not existent. There's small parts of it in Android, but not what we need. So really, you have this great debug extension in WebKit that most people don't even know about, that gives you information of, is something drawn on the GPU or is something drawn on the CPU? Gives you information on memory leaks and memory consumption and all this interesting information that we need to build a performant game engine. And all of this we don't have on mobile. So it's just, really bad. Now, that's all about bashing. Let's talk about the good parts. So some of you might recognize this one, WebKit Overflow Scrolling Touch. That's amazing because for the first time ever, there's a property you can actually have, if you want to construct a application that has a fixed header, fixed footer, you would take the inside content and do an overflow auto in there, and then you could flick through it. And now finally we can do that so it looks really native. WebSockets in iOS. So that's also something I really like. And there's numerous improvements over Web Inspector. So if WebKit is one of your main development platforms, it sucks that back then Firebug was so much better than the inspector that you always have to switch back to Firebug to look at what's wrong. And nowadays the Web Inspector is actually really great. Finally, hardware accelerated canvas. That's a big one for us. It's really gaining traction. It's on many platforms nowadays. So i9 has it, i10 obviously, Firefox, Chrome on Vista and Windows 7. Well, I say Vista and Windows 7 because Windows XP is still a big bottleneck. And then Safari 5.1 also has it on Lion. That's pretty exciting. So that's the review. Let's talk a bit about HTML5. So HTML5 is still the hot new buzz, as we all know. And the way to get hired is to tell, I'm an HTML5 developer. But what does that mean? So one of the big issues I see with HTML5 at this point is this situation. So if you look at iOS 5, you see around 1,500 native APIs. And compare that to around 20 APIs on Safari that we get access to. And that, I mean, that really says it all, right? So we need more APIs. We need those camera APIs, file system APIs. We need a lot more love by the vendors. And also, HTML5, is really something that everybody wants, but nobody can get. So it's like this nice shoes. And that I mean basically as in nobody actually can, plus nobody knows how. So every company wants to jump on the HTML5 bandwagon, but there's no talent, there's no resources, there's no training. You can't just Google up this stuff. You can just, Google, give me an isometric game engine in JavaScript. Theory run, why is that, right? So theory run is good devs don't want to learn HTML5. So, well, we all have heard that probably. Theory 2 is companies don't have the balls to ditch and to explore smaller than 9. And this is something that I'm particularly mad about. So, because, those companies will probably argue, but, a large percent of our users serve with these browsers. Now, there's this nice quote by Steve Jobs, and this is the really exciting part where it says, that the TV networks are in business to give people exactly what they want. And that's very, very bad. So, we think about, all those crazy channels and TV programs and say, this is shit. But this is shit that people actually want to watch. And there's other TV programs that give people what's exciting. So, what people should really think about is traditional game makers, make people buy new hardware. And those companies don't have the balls to force them to update the 10-year-old browser, and that's bad. So we should stop thinking about, what can we make better for IE6 users, but really think about how do we have them upgrade their browsers. Because it's luxury to just be able to download free software and install it, Traditional game makers didn't have that luxury. They had them buy new hardware, go to store to play their games, and it still worked. So, upgrade the web. So what's still the problem with HTML5 gaming? HTML5 was not created with games in mind. The WTC and WhatWG historically had no members from gaming companies. And that's telling. So there was simply no focus whatsoever on gaming. Also, web devs are seldom good game devs, and vice versa. That's something I've learned in the past. That's something I learned when looking at myself. I started as a web developer and only very slowly became a game developer. And that transition in any direction takes a lot of time. And that's the third significant issue. We don't have rich IDEs to build stuff. We had one of the talks mentioned that, I think the first talk talked about tools. And I totally agree. We need tools. The reason why Flash is so insanely popular is it has great tooling. The Flash IDE is really, really useful. And we don't have that. I see efforts being done, but we're not there yet. So let's talk a bit about Zynga and our specific role, at Zynga. Zynga's tech mission is to make the web a better place for games. That's what we want to achieve. How do we achieve that? Well, there's a couple of things we do. WTC participation, dialogues with browser vendors, game engine development, and open source. So WTC, Zynga is a pretty fresh member of WTC. We joined February 2011. And we started to actively propose new specs. So there's stuff in there that seems non-obvious to most people. Like one of the things that we proposed was a pointer events opacity proposal, where you could basically say, take this opacity threshold on any element, and then make the pointer events go through that opacity. So imagine you have, a element, and you want to have rounded corners on that element. If you hit on the edge of the rounded corner, you still hit the element, and that's stupid. We don't want that. And for graphics, it's even more interesting. So you have a house, right? And you want to be able to click the house behind that, but you're still on the rectangle of the first house. So those use cases we have all the time, and they can solve a lot of problems for traditional web companies as well. We are having an open dialogue and very well exchanged with most of the big browser vendors. So whether it's Google Chrome, Firefox, Safari, or Internet Explorer, it's really important that we talk to the implementers because they usually, and you can do that too, obviously. There's no reason why you can't. It's really important to have a voice and tell them what we need because they're usually they're coming from a whole different perspective. And they're not necessarily implementing what's good for you. They're sometimes implementing what's good for them to be able to do, right? So they focus on the things that they can do quickly and easily. But this point event opacity thing, for instance, is really, really hard to do. But everyone agrees that it's a great addition. So a couple of those interesting things that we proposed: block orientation change, multi-channel sound on iOS, mobile device debugging. So those are just some quick examples. So that's what we do to bring the web forward. But then finally, and this is probably the most significant point, open source. Now this is exciting because I talked about that a couple months ago and said, we do have plans eventually to do open source because we want to give away something and learn from giving it away. And I'm really excited to announce that open source at Zynga starts today. So today, for the first time ever, you're getting access to 2 projects that we're open sourcing. They have been beta internally for quite some while, and we think we are now ready to give you a sneak peek. So today we'll be soft launching 2 of 4 projects that we want to launch this year. And the 2 we're launching is Viewporter, something I call Viewporter, and Scroller. Jukebox and Speedrun are more focused on actual game development, so they're well suited for a different audience. We'll be releasing them later on. So let's talk about Viewporter first. Now, imagine you are running a page on your iPhone and you want to create a web app, right? So you have this blue element that's left bottom 0, this red element that's top right 0. Stretch it up to the middle of the screen, and that's usually what you get, right? So you do a normal meta viewport, like the thing you learn everywhere, and that's what you get. But people want to scroll away this URL bar that's on top, because that URL bar doesn't need to be there. If you want to play a game or if you want to maximize your app, you don't want to have that URL bar. So there's this crazy hack that everyone knows: scroll to 01 on the window to scroll away the URL bar. Now what keeps happening is this. So everyone who's done mobile development will probably have seen this before. So the stuff scrolls up, but now left bottom 0 is not where you expect it anymore. So you have this blank space here that keeps staying there. And Viewporter changed that. So Viewporter, if you plug in the Viewporter plugin to your page, it will do that. So it will scroll away everything it can find, including debug bars, URL bars, whatever. Will hit if you want to, the native resolution. So you could always the speed improvement. And it will always create the right viewport dimensions dynamically on Android and iOS devices. So left bottom 0 is actually left bottom 0. That's what it's all about. So it's around 6K unified, iOS and Android, handles orientation change. So twist it as much as you want to. I remember we were rotating devices for 4 weeks or so. It was no fun. It can also normalize DPI. That's pretty exciting. So let's say you have a element on screen that should be a centimeter in size on any device. You can do that. You can say my base DPI is 100, and it will do 100 on any device. So it will look the same on iOS 4, on iPhone 4, look the same on iPhone 3GS and any kind of Android phone. And it can also map device pixels to screen pixels. So that was the important part for us, because that's a huge performance gain. So if you trigger the native resolution on the device, you might have some trickiness around handling layout, but it's really a huge speed bump. So That's URL. I will, this is not public yet. After this talk, I'll give me 10 minutes and I'll have this URL ready for you to check out. So it's all in GitHub. So next topic. So this is Words with Friends. Some of you might know it. It's pretty popular in the US. Words with Friends is just a traditional, looks like a traditional iOS application. And you have this top fixed header and bottom header. And in the middle, there's the game board. And this could be any web app. So, in the middle, you have an area that you can scroll, right? And in a classical web app, you would probably do position fixed on the top and the bottom, and then have the inner content scroll. Or you do an overflow auto container in the middle. All of them would work. However, they never worked on mobile before. And why is that? That's because that's what most people don't realize. Panning is not scrolling. So on mobile devices, on iOS and Android and WebOS, anything that's touch-based, you have this concept of actually panning the viewport rather than scrolling it. So the viewport size is a bigger size than the device for, desktop-optimized websites. And in order to not cause too many reflow issues, they're not shifting the screen size to be really tiny. They're basically allowing you to pan the whole viewport. And panning is in conflict with scrolling, so you couldn't have both. But now, there's a couple companies that tried to fix this and to provide solutions to that. So there's iScroll that created in JavaScript and CSS transforms and created a library. Scrollability is doing the same, I think, using CSS animations. Google Mail has its own implementation. Actually, even Apple has its own implementation written in JavaScript for their mobile web apps, which is hilarious, but that's the way they did it too. So everyone had to find a workaround for that, because there was, you could have overflow auto before, but you would need, 2 fingers to scroll the content. There was no nifty acceleration or anything. Now, as mentioned already, we got WebKit Overflow scrolling touch now, and that's awesome. It's really full of win. So it's full of win, and it really allows you to scroll really nicely, but what about Canvas, right? Let's say I want to do a game that's on Canvas, so you have your Canvas screen maximized to 100%, and you want to scroll in there. Right, you could do a 10,000 by 10,000 pixel canvas, but I'm pretty sure that you would run into performance problems here. So for Canvas, this is obviously not a solution. You needed something different. So meet the Scroller. Scroller is our second plugin that we're releasing today, and we're really excited about it. The Scroller is 100% event-driven. It's just logic, and it's not applying anything to the DOM or any values, anything that's really related to layout. That means it can handle DOM, Canvas, SVG, WebGL, whatever you want it to handle. Because only what you do is you tell it that someone started scrolling. It will do all the mathematics and logic for you and fire events. So you can basically say whatever you want to and modify your scroll values internally. And say, if you have a DOM element, it's as easy as, sticking CSS transform values on the element and just shifting it around. The whole logic is done by the plugin. It handles more than scrolling. So it handles zooming, snapping, locking, paging. Because that's also the things that you can't do with WebKit Overflow Scroll. And with the other solutions. So on a game board, on a traditional isometric game board, like Farmville and Cityville, you always want to have the ability to zoom in and out. And that's something that, for instance, WebKit Overflow Scrolling couldn't give us. So again, this project is on GitHub later on, and feel free to play with it, and we're looking really to a lot of feedback. So that's the Scroller, and I'm going to show you a preview right away. So let's see. Here we go. So that is the Canvas implementation of the Scroller. This is how it can pan around. It has locking. You can flick it. You can zoom it. You can flick and zoom at the same time, which you can do on Apple stuff. You can have stuff like, it's all programmatic, so you have an API, right? You get all the values back there, you can do whatever you want with it. Enable everything on the fly. Scroll use certain coordinates and zoom to a level. Now, the good part is that the native demo, so this is native, we just wanted to compare it to the actual touchpad that's in Mac OS X. Scroll demo on DOM, so this is DOM, this is HTML, looks really exactly the same. It's the same thing. It's the exact same logic. You do it for Canvas, you do it for DOM. And the only thing you're doing differently is the actual applying of the values. This plugin can do more than that. So for instance, we have snapping in there. So let's say you have those small rectangles and you want to snap to them. So here's what it's doing. It also allows you to page. So paging horizontally and paging vertically. So here we go. That's the scroller. So finally, I have no idea how much time I have, but finally, let's talk a bit about the future. So let's take a look at Avis Engine and Zynga Engine. Now, Avis Engine has been a prototype. We threw it away when we started working on the real deal. We wanted to start all over and create a really performance-driven engine. So what you've seen on the Avis engine was around 50 to 100 elements that moved on the screen, or like not even moved, but were rendered on the screen. And what we're dealing with right now is more than 1,000 elements on screen that we render and that might or might not move around. So that's a really big shift. So it's 10x increase of objects. Stuff is smaller, stuff moves around, and it's really the real deal. So really, what we realized is when doing the development for over 1.5 years now, we realized that we had some expectations and some assumptions that we did back then. And some of you might remember me always talking about how the DOM is the right solution to do games, because Canvas is too slow. And I said that over and over and over. Now, actually, it's not true anymore. And it's not true anymore to some extent, but that's really interesting. So DOM is now, first of all, DOM is now faster than inner HTML. So if you create something in the DOM, like with native DOM operations, it's faster than applying stuff in inner HTML. That's something that's totally changed from 2 years ago. So 2 years ago, I was always talking about use inner HTML wherever you can, just put it all out there, and this has changed. Canvas is now faster than DOM in some cases. So on iOS 5, I'm pretty sure if you're building a game, Canvas will perform faster. On Windows 7, Canvas will perform faster. There's no need anymore for external CSS. So we had this technique where we used external CSS to, not have as much as, stuff in the inner HTML stuff you're rendering out. So now you can just put all inline CSS on the elements, which just work equally well, maybe even better. And that's interesting to us because we really see the technology shifting from time to time. And luckily, we have been able to adapt it really shortly. So that's good. What we're really working on, so if you work out something in Flash, for instance, right, you usually have a way to render and that's it, and then you have, all kinds of game modules. But we have this technique where we implemented hot swapping in the engine. So we're prepared for whatever comes up. We have all the engine logic implemented generically, like the scroller, but we can hot swap any renderer at any given time. So we can hot swap to an HTML renderer for Windows XP, or switch to a Canvas renderer on Windows 7, or switch to something else on WebGL. So that makes it really, really, really flexible. So some examples of craziness that we're doing on the engine, and stuff I'm looking forward to talk about in the next couple of JSConfs. Arrays were way too slow for us. So that's interesting. So we have a lot of loops in our engine. We're looping through a lot of them, handling objects, handling what to draw, handling what to animate. And we actually implemented a custom linked list on top of JavaScript that is dramatically faster than arrays in our use case, where we're inserting a lot of stuff into the list and removing a lot of stuff dynamically. So that's the basic stuff we're doing in our daily jobs, which is really non-obvious. Or depth sorting. So every game has this challenge that you need to sort objects that are behind others in the correct way. So if you have an ISO game board, obviously this example here looks bad, doesn't make sense, and this example does. So there's those routines you call depth sorting, and perfect depth sorting is something we worked on by slicing images. It's really weird and really wicked, and we worked on it for a long time. We have read countless books on this, and none of the books were giving us perfect depth sorting. So those are the kind of problems we're trying to solve. And honestly, I think we're getting close, but we need help to get the final pieces done. So we're really looking for engineers that can help us. Please apply today. Talk to us if you're looking for a ridiculous JS challenge, because we can certainly give you great challenges. And we really want you at Singer Germany. So join the fun, visit our booth, visit this awesome shot URL. And other than that, see you soon. Yeah, thank you.
We got plenty of time for questions, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of them, so go ahead.
Hi. I also work at a games company, and I know many of the problems that you talked about are familiar to me. I was thinking in terms of tools, where do you think that the best option could come from? Do you think it could come from Adobe and something related to Flash, or something else entirely?
I'm not sure, actually. I think Adobe, we've seen Adobe trying to enter the HTML5 gaming, HTML5 space, right, and produce tools. I think all of them are very early. And now we also see companies like Unity that already have a great 3D game IDE and bringing them new platforms, like they recently announced, having Flash as their deployment platform. So I think those traditional game engines could really be able to port to WebGL and stuff like that. So that's an option. But I think there's also room for IDEs that work for web engineers, right? Because I see a lot of web developers that want to enter the game market. So it's just different target audience, For traditional game developers, something like Unity is great. And for people like me, I would rather wish for a IDE that looks a bit like Fireworks, but it's really all about games. So let's see, I don't know.
I have a question about the linked lists you mentioned, which are faster than arrays. Why are they faster, and what are they implemented on these arrays themselves?
The linked lists are, I can't talk too much about it because I'm not the one that implemented it. But Eva, do you want to talk about it? Yeah.
Well, so previously there was always the problem that I had a really bad echo. So previously there was always the problem with JavaScript performance being too slow. So custom data types, which you would normally use in C or C++, didn't make any sense because the overhead of creating objects and all the stuff dynamically at runtime was was pretty much destroying all the gains you would gain from the algorithm. So of course in linked lists it's pretty much all O1 unless you need random access, but you hardly ever need random access in our cases. So of course having an O1 linked list for removal, or even I implemented it so that you could even have O1 contains, and that's also pretty useful. So in the end, it's O1 versus ON, and since we have thousands of objects and stuff in there, that obviously will speed up things dramatically.
All right, thank you.
Hey there. You mentioned it would be awesome if you could export from Unity, which is a great development tool and really nice, to WebGL. There was a project called J3D, which does exactly that. That was announced at On Game Start like a week ago.
Okay, interesting. I have to check it out. Thanks.
Any more questions?
Do you still use jQuery in your engine?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we do. We still use jQuery. Now, jQuery can be bottleneck, right? So you have to be careful about where to use it. It can dramatically speed up code development, but if you have a very, very hot render loop, right, it probably doesn't make sense to use it in there. So we're trying to replace instances of jQuery where we have, a lot of optimization to do, but we're still using it across the engine. So definitely.
Great. If there's no more questions, give Paul another round of applause, please.
Thank you.